Hello and welcome to this Adult Forum podcast for Faith Lutheran Church. Here, the weekend of March 29th, 2020. This Sunday, the Sunday of this weekend, will be the fifth Sunday in Lent. And so next Sunday, the following Sunday, 7 days from this weekend or so, will be Palm Sunday and the entry point of the festivities of Holy Week. So our topic for Adult Forum this week will be the Desert Fathers. That is to say, the early ascetics who lived in the desert right around the 3rd century. But before we jump into the topic of the early Desert Fathers, a few announcements, a few reminders. First and foremost, this is the last weekend of our Lenten series, and next week is Palm Sunday, which kicks off Holy Week. So about 10 days from now, be sure to check back here for sermons from Maundy Thursday and Good Friday as we slowly make our way into the glories of Easter, which will be approximately 2 weeks from now for the recording of this podcast. Secondly, although we have suspended all live events at Faith Lutheran Church at 730 Collingwood Avenue in Whitehall, Ohio, a lot of wonderful ministry is still happening. Check out our Facebook link. I'll put that link in the description. Check out our website for ways to be connected with each other through this time of social distancing. And if you feel so moved, I'll put a link to this in the description. Feel free to give to the ongoing ministries of Faith Lutheran Church. We believe that God is calling us as people of faith to expect great things and to take steps forward into the future that God is calling us, expecting those great things. And through continuous offerings given by people just like you, it allows us as a community of faith, as the community at faith, to take those steps forward in confidence to the future in which God is calling us. So again, I'll put that giving link in the description of this video at the bottom. You can hit more information and find that link there. With the announcements out of the way, let's look at the Desert Fathers, or we call them the ascetics. And an ascetic is a person who practices severe self-discipline and abstention. So when we talk about the early Desert Fathers, when we talk about these 3rd century ascetics, we're talking about people who left Alexandria, that area, in Egypt in that area, to live by themselves in the desert, to abstain from culture, to live in this really self-deprived reality, so they could focus their entire lives on prayer, on religious disciplines, on their spirituality, on listening to the voice of God. And so I thought that, the world outside being what it is, with our current realities of social distancing these days, what better topic to discuss than these early Desert Fathers and mothers, these early ascetics. Aesthetics is the visual understanding and reality of art and home decor. Aesthetics. Ascetics are those who practice severe discipline and abstination. But so as we are forced to live these lives that make us feel remote, why not look at these early church forebearers who actively lived that lifestyle out of their own desire, out of their own free will? So, a few things before we start cracking into the writings of the early Desert Fathers and Mothers. First of all, the name of the desert where so many of these ascetics lived was the ascetic desert, which is at the core of the term asceticism. The ascetic desert, which is in Egypt. And so knowing kind of where they are, and you can look that up, the Ascetic Desert, Sectec, if you would like to look that up. And we can ask, who are the Desert Fathers? So the phrase Desert Fathers was used to describe early Christian hermits, ascetics, there's that word again, and monks who lived mainly in the Ascetic Desert of Egypt, beginning around the 3rd century, so the 200s AD. The most well-known of the Desert Fathers is Anthony the Great, but more about him later. I'll read you some of the things that he has said. The desert monastic communities that grew out of the informal gathering of these hermit monks actually later in world history became the model, the foundation, and kind of the backbone in terms of understanding Christian monasticism. That is, the monasteries and the monks. The idea that we have, we remember Martin Luther in the 1500s went and hid at or he became a monk. I'm sorry. He was, there's that great story where he is a law student in Erfurt, Germany, and he is walking back to visit his parents in Mansfield, Germany, and he gets caught in a thunderstorm in the town of Stotterheim. And there's a lot of different retellings of this story, but the most popular is that he is walking from Erfurt back to Mansfield, and he's caught in a thunderstorm, and he's running, and the thunder is rumbling, and the lightning is crashing, and he trips over a root. And most people of the era in the early 16th century would carry with themselves a dagger for either to utilize it as a tool or to defend themselves if they came across a robber. And so Luther tripped over a root during this thunderstorm, and as he fell, he accidentally stabbed himself in the side. And so he prays outside of the town of Stotterheim on this back road, and he prays to Saint Anne. And Saint Anne is, if we look at hagiography and that sort of thing, Saint Anne is the mother of the Virgin Mary, so Jesus' grandmother. And Luther says, Saint Anne, if you save me, I'll become a monk. And so Luther survives the night, and he makes it to Mansfield. And then he visits his parents, and he goes back to Erfurt, and the day he gets back, he sells all of his textbooks, and he leaves the law school and goes into the monastery. That monastery there in the 1500s kind of has the idea that traces back to the asceticism of the 3rd century, where Christians, highly pious Christians, wanting to focus on God, came to the conclusion that the best way to do that was to leave the city, leave the towns, and to lock yourself away where you can't be distracted or tempted or prone to stumble. And so for St. Anthony the Great, the idea of doing that was in the Ascetic Desert of Egypt. For the people of Luther's time, that idea was to go lock yourself in a monastery and to not go out into, too far, not to stray too far, so that you could spend your time reciting scripture and praying and focusing on a holy life. Anyway, back to our topic, ascetic monks, the ascetic desert fathers. So St. Anthony the Great kind of launched the movement that became the Desert Fathers. Sometime around 270 AD, Anthony heard a sermon one Sunday based on the text of the Gospel of Matthew, the 19th chapter, the 21st verse, stating that perfection could only be achieved by selling all of one's possessions, giving the proceeds to the poor, and following Christ. So Anthony followed that advice literally, and he sold everything and followed Christ, and then he made a further step of moving deep into the desert to seek complete solitude. which is far more than the 6 feet that the CDC is asking us to keep in between ourselves and the people in front of us in the line at the post office. St. Anthony said, no, I need to be further than 6 feet. I need to be further than 6 miles. I need to go all the way into the desert so I am near no one. And I'm going to do this of my own volition, because only there can I fully turn my attention to Christ Almighty. And so the solitude, the sacrifice of the desert was seen by Anthony as an alternative to martyrdom. You know, martyrdom, those who are martyrs are those who are put to death for the cause of the faith. For Anthony, his solitude and sacrifice of desert life was seen as an alternative to that, which martyrdom was formerly seen by many Christians as the highest form of sacrifice. And now, if being an ascetic, if living by oneself is seen as an alternative to that, it is also seen as the highest form of sacrifice. And this is the root for why the monastic lifestyle became such a powerful reality in Christendom. I mean, this is why it was seen as the model for monastic life. You want to be a great Christian, you want to follow in the paths of the forefathers, great, you don't have to die anymore. You just have to die to the world by locking yourself away in a monastery. Or in St. Anthony's case, and in the people we're about to hear from, to go live by yourself in the desert, in the ascetic desert, to be an ascetic, ascetic. I always trip up those words, my apologies. So, as life continued, Anthony the Great quickly gathered followers, eager to live their lives in accordance with the solidarity and separation from the material goods that Anthony was living. And so it turned into this weird community of people saying, well, let's all live alone, but we can all live alone together. Right? And that's the big difference between St. Anthony the Great and the later monastic movements. St. Anthony wanted to go live by himself alone out in the desert. But then people came around and wanted to learn from him, and they wanted to follow him and that sort of thing. Not follow in the way of replacing Jesus, but they wanted to follow St. Anthony to do what he did. And then in the monastic communities, let's think about Martin Luther in the 16th century. It's, we all want to live alone, but we are all going to live alone together in these monolithic structures. So there's a little different there. And it was recorded by Athanasius, the author of the Athanasian Creed, which typically Lutheran churches always say on Holy Trinity Sunday because of the way that it approaches the Trinity. It was written by Athanasius that Anthony the Great received special privileges from God, such as the ability to heal the sick, inspire others to have faith in healing through God, and even converse with God upon occasion. And it was around this time that desert monasticism appeared nearly simultaneously in several areas throughout Egypt and including Syria. And this can make sense if the historians are saying that Anthony the Great is acquiring or receiving special privileges from God, and I want to be a holy person, and I want to follow in that path, then why wouldn't I run out to the desert and try to do the exact same thing? I undoubtedly would. And so other people are hearing the stories, other people are hearing the news because more people are reporting the news than just Athanasius. And so suddenly a lot of holy people, or people who want to live that life of very strict solidary piety, are all moving out to the desert. And so word is getting around. Did you hear about this desert father? Did you hear about this one? This one can do this. That one can do that. That sort of thing. So just a few more pointers before we start reading some of the words of the Desert Fathers that have been recorded in history that you can buy, or you can go to a library. You can go to probably one of the Columbus Metropolitan Libraries, or the library at Capital University, or even across the street, the Hamma Library at Trinity Seminary, and you can find books that have the writings of these Desert Fathers from the 3rd century AD. But just a few more points. The Desert Fathers advocated certain practices, all right? They advocated for withdrawal from society, and more than just 6 feet, right? It was a complete withdrawal from society. The hermits and the Desert Fathers and Mothers can best be, in one word, identified as hermits. They hid by themselves and went into the desert. The hermits doubted that religion and politics could ever truly produce a Christian society. And so the best way to separate religion and politics is to live outside of the cities and city-states where politics were so prevalent. Second was hesychasm, which is a mystical tradition. Hesychasm, it is a style of prayer. It is interior silence and continual prayer. Let me repeat that. It is a mystical tradition of interior silence and continual prayer, of being silent outside and in, and yet open to the holy conversation that is prayer. Because if prayer is holy conversation, then we have to remember to listen as much, if not more, than we speak. Also, the Desert Fathers advocated for charity and forgiveness, to give to anyone who came to them. There are many, many stories of Anthony and many other Desert Fathers where students would come to sit at their feet and ask them a question, and they would always have time to answer questions or provide their young disciples to be, a piece of bread or a place to stay. And finally, the Desert Fathers advocated recitation of Scripture, that is, memorizing the Bible. And this was to set time to the day. They would memorize certain passages at certain hours of the day, and this allowed them to give continuity to their lives and to the structures of their day. With everything that's going outside in the coronavirus, I have a lot of friends who have kids, and their kids are not going to school. And so the one thing I've heard all of them say is that our days, we've had to form up very quickly and very definitively daily schedules that my child will wake up at this hour, do schoolwork for these hours, have recess, do homework for these hours, take a break, do chores or whatnot, and then do evening homework after that. Because to set time to our day is to give our days structure. And if we give our days structure, we will be more productive because we know what to expect. And we can frame everything else we need to do that, to do around that. All right? So those are kind of the 4 things the Desert Fathers would advocate for. Withdrawal from society, hesychasm, the continual prayer, charity and forgiveness, we're looking at that as one thing, and recitation of Scripture. All right. So that's our primer on the front end of understanding the Desert Fathers. What I'd like to do now, I have a book. It's a wonderful book. It's titled The Sayings of the Desert Fathers, an Alphabetical Collection. It was translated by Benedicta Ward, and the preface is by a person whose name is Metropolitan Anthony. I will put a copy of the link to this book in the description to this YouTube video. So if after listening to this, you think to yourself, man, that was really good stuff. I really want to know what else the Desert Fathers have to say. You can click that link. It should take you over to Amazon and you can just pick up a copy for yourself. Or you can see the cover and then go to the Columbus Metropolitan Library, Capital University, Trinity Seminary, or wherever you borrow books from. And you can get yourself a copy of it, maybe find it in another means online. That being said, let's jump in. Now, what we're going to start with. So the way this book is arranged is it's arranged alphabetical by Desert Father. And then they're just numbered. And sometimes they're a little bit longer. Sometimes they read like fortune cookie. They read like a fortune cookie. But, either way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in the A's. So we'll start with Anthony the Great, who we've been talking about. And we're just going to walk through this book and we're going to read a few things. I'll make a point to read the page number and the saying number. So if you pick up this book and you want to say, hey, where did Pastor Hilly find that one at? You'll be able to find it. All right, so the first one is from Anthony the Great. It's on page 3 of the book. It's item number 13. Anthony writes, quote, a hunter in the desert saw Abba Anthony enjoying himself with the brethren, and he was shocked. Wanting to show him that it was necessary sometimes to meet the needs of the brethren, the old man, which is Anthony, said to him, put an arrow in your bow and shoot it. So he did. The old man said, shoot another. And so he did. Then the old man said, shoot yet again. And the hunter replied, if I bend my bow so much, I will break it. Then the old man said to him, it is the same with the work of God. If we stretch the brethren beyond measure, they will soon break. Sometimes it is necessary to come down to meet their needs. When he heard these words, the hunter was pierced by compunction, and greatly edified by the old man, he went away. As for the brethren, they went home strengthened. End quote. So what a great story. Anthony the Great, they call him Abba Anthony, Abba meaning teacher or father. He's hanging out with the boys, and a hunter goes, man, why are you enjoying yourself? I thought you had to be more stringent. I thought you had to be more ascetic. I thought you had to be more solitary. And here Anthony teaches him a great lesson by saying, shoot an arrow, shoot an arrow, shoot an arrow, shoot another arrow. And the hunter says, well, if I keep doing that, my bow is going to break. You gotta lay off it sometimes. And Anthony says, exactly, it's the same way with the Word of God. We have to relax. We have to relax in our lifestyles. We have to relax in our piety and our daily lives, so that we can go home strengthened. And another way of that is to say that we could start the next day strengthened. If we go 100 miles an hour, 24 hours a day, any of us are going to burn out fast. But sometimes you have to relax a little bit and then go home early so that you can be where you want to be the next day, right? And so Anthony is saying this in the mid 3rd century AD. It's like Isaiah writes, there's nothing new under the sun. Anthony knew that. All right, how about another one from Anthony, Anthony the Great, as they call him. Page 4, item 15, quote, the brothers praised a monk before Abba Anthony. When the monk came to see him, Anthony wanted to know how he would bear insults, and seeing that he could not bear them at all, he said to him, "You are like a village magnificently decorated on the outside, but destroyed from within by robbers." End quote. I think that's maybe one of my favorite things from Abba Anthony. You know, this idea that this man who everybody is praising, Anthony evaluates and sees quickly that he looks like a village magnificently decorated, but stripped, destroyed from the inside by robbers. I mean, how often is it that people look really good? Their Facebook post may look good, their clothes may look good, their house may look good, but their confidence, their self-respect, their trust, their sense of value has all been robbed away by life or by malicious friends or by culture or by all that sort of things. And so there's a warning. There's a warning in this text. You know, it's not what you look like. It's what's on the inside. You know, the old colloquialism, you can't judge a book by the cover. This one also from page 4. This is item number 16. Quote, "A brother said to Abba Anthony, 'Pray for me.' The old man said to him, 'I will have no mercy upon you, nor will God have any, if you yourself do not make an effort, and if you do not pray to God.'" End quote. I know that may seem harsh, but it's kind of saying don't ask other people to do for you what you will not do yourself. You know, to come to Anthony and go, "Hey, Anthony, I want you to pray for me." You know, Anthony could have said, "Well, are you praying for yourself? You know, I want you to do me a favor." I'm like, "Well, would you do you a favor?" You know, how do we engage with that, with that culture? A few more from Anthony the Great. This comes from page 5, number 19. "The brethren came to Abba Anthony and said to him," quote, "Speak a word, how are we to be saved?" Unquote. The old man said to them, "You have heard the scriptures that should teach you how." But they said, "We want to hear from you too, Father." Then the old man said to them, "The gospel says, if anyone strikes you on the cheek, turn to him the other cheek also." Matthew chapter 5, verse 39. They said, "We cannot do that." The old man said, "If you cannot offer the other cheek, at least allow one cheek to be struck." "We cannot do that either," they said. So he said, "If you are not able to do that, do not return evil for evil." And they said, "We cannot do that either." Then the old man said to his disciple, "Prepare a little brew of corn for these invalids. If you cannot do this or that, what can I do for you? What you need is prayers." End quote. Turn the other cheek. If you can't do that, offer a cheek. If you can't do that, at least don't give bad for bad. And the answer of the brethren was the same. We can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. Well, if you're not willing to do anything, the best we can do for you is pray. Because there is a personal responsibility there. There's a personal responsibility. All right, our final reading from Anthony the Great, Abba Anthony. Here we go, and I quote, "A brother in the monastery was falsely accused of fornication, and he arose and went to Abba Anthony. The brethren also came from the monastery to correct him and bring him back. They set about proving that he had done this thing, but he defended himself and denied that he had done anything of the kind. Now Abba Paphtheatus, who is called Cephas, happened to be there, and he told them this parable. I've seen a man on the bank of a river, buried up to his knees in mud, and some men came to give him a hand to help him out. But they pushed him further in, up to his neck. Then Abba Anthony said this about Abba Panthenitis. Here is a real man who can care for souls and save them. All those present were pierced to the heart by the words of the old man, and they asked forgiveness of the brother. So, admonished by the fathers, they took the brother back into the monastery. End quote. I love the little parable here about the man who, I've seen a man on the bank of the river buried up to his knees in the mud, and people came to give him a hand to help him out, but they pushed him further up to his neck. How often does somebody think they're extending a hand, but actually they're using their hand to push you further down? I think this happens in a number of ways, in conversations with people we don't like and with people we love. You start saying, oh, I'm in this hard spot. And then the response becomes, well, all you need to do is this, or you need to do that, or you should do this, or you should do that. And suddenly, all of these you need to do's or you should do, instead of being the rope to help pull the person out of the situation, become hands pushing them further down. Extra pressure so that they can feel the weight of the world on their shoulders. All right, let's take a step forward. We're at page 9. Let's listen to some of the words from the Desert Father Arsenius. Abba Arsenius. We're on page 9. It's item 1. While still living in the palace, Abba Arsenius prayed to God in these words: Lord, lead me in the way of salvation. And a voice came saying to him, Arsenius, flee from men, and you will be saved. End quote. Now, I know you may be asking to yourselves, well, what's this about a palace? Arsenius was born in Rome around the year 360. He was well educated. He was of senatorial rank. He was appointed by an emperor as a tutor of princes. But then in about 394, he sailed away secretly to Alexandria. And from there, he went to the desert and placed himself under the guidance of another desert father. We see this story often. People who are raised or born in lives of luxury, and they leave that life of luxury to find what the world has outside of that. And in the reading we just heard, when he says, Lord, lead me in the way of salvation, the voice of God says, flee from men and you will be saved. Go away. Go by yourself. And so a second reading about Arsenius, page 9.2. Having withdrawn to the solitary life, Arsenius made the same prayer again, and he heard the voice of God saying to him, Arsenius, flee, be silent, pray always, for these are the source of sinlessness. End quote. What a simple, beautiful, and powerful reality. The source of sinlessness is being silent and praying always. It doesn't really get any more straightforward than that. Not at all. All right, one final from Arsenius, a favorite of mine. This is page 11, item 15. Abba Arsenius used to say that 1 hour's sleep is enough for a monk if he is a good fighter. End quote. 1 hour of sleep. If you're willing to fight the devil, 1 hour of sleep is all you need. You know, if you're a fighter, if you're going to get it done, if you have to get it done, then get your 1 hour and move along your way. All right. Let's move on to the Desert Father Agathon. This comes from page 20, item number 5. Quote, "It is said concerning Abba Agathon that some monks came to him, having heard tell of his great discernment. Wanting to see if he would lose his temper, they said to him, 'Aren't you that Agathon who is said to be a fornicator and a proud man?' 'Yes, it is very true,' he answered. They resumed, 'Aren't you that Agathon who is always talking nonsense?' 'I am.' Again, they said, 'Aren't you Agathon the heretic?' But at that, he replied, 'I am not a heretic.' So they asked him, 'Tell us why you accepted everything we cast you, but repudiate this last insult.' He replied, 'The first accusations I take to myself, for that is good for my soul. But heresy is separation from God. Now I have no wish to be separated from God.' At this saying, they were astonished at his discernment and returned edified." What a brilliant story. They go to Agathon and they, call him names and insult him twice. And he's like, yeah, whatever, that's fine. It's like the childhood rhyme, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. But it's with the accusation of being a heretic. Because as a person of faith, he understands that heresy is a separation between him and God. And he doesn't mind insults, but he doesn't want to be separated from God. And to me, the most powerful thing is at the end of this little writing, it says, at this saying, they, the people asking him the questions, were astonished at his discernment, and they returned edified. So they go to try to poke the bear, and they leave as the people who are edified. And they are the people who are made better, even though the reason that they approached Abba Agathon was to poke the bear and get him to lose his attention. Or lose his temper, I should say. Great stuff. Just great stuff there. Page 21, item 6. It was said of Abba Agathon that he spent a long time building a cell with his disciples. That's to say a dwelling. A meager dwelling, which is why it was called a cell. At last, when it was finished, they came to live there. Seeing something during the first week which seemed to him harmful, he said to his disciples, "Get up, let us leave this place." But they were dismayed and replied, "If you had already decided to move, why have we taken so much trouble building the cell? People will be scandalized at us and will say, 'Look at them, moving again. What unstable people.'" He saw they were held back by timidity. And so he said to them, "If some are scandalized, others, on the contrary, will be much edified and will say, 'How blessed are they who go away for God's sake, having no other care.' However, let him who wants to come, come. As for me, I am going." Then they prostrated themselves to the ground and besought him to allow them to go with him. End quote. It's all about your perspective. His disciples were thinking everyone would consider Abba Agathon wasteful, but that wasn't how Abba Agathon saw that. And so he decided to do it his way, which more power for him. you know. And what a life lesson. Anybody can look at any of the actions we make and read our actions a host of different ways. So believe in yourself, listen to God, pray, be in that holy conversation, make your decision and stay the course. See where God is leading you. To me, reading so many of these Desert Father sayings, it really does get to the point of trust God and stay the course. Because if you do those two things, if you trust God and you stay the course, then you will get where God is leading you. And sometimes it's a short game and sometimes it's a long game. But it's always a game worth playing. Turning a few more pages now to the Desert Father Abba Amones. This comes from page 26, item number 2. It was said of Abba Amones that he had killed a basilisk. Going into the desert one day to draw water from the lake and seeing a basilisk, he threw himself face to the ground, saying, "Lord, either I die or he dies." And immediately, by the power of God, the basilisk burst asunder. Basilisk being a large reptile or amphibian, a very large lizard, a very small dragon, somewhere in the middle. I mean, they're not as big as dragons, they're not as small as lizards, but that kind of gives you a visual. But he saw an animal that scared the death out of him. And he prayed to God, and he said, "God, either that dies or I'm going to die." And it burst asunder. Because those who are faithful, God remains faithful too. All right. What else do we have here? I'm going to flip a few more pages. Page 35, item number 1, Abba Alnous, Alonius, Alnous. Page 35, item 1, quote, Abba Alnous said, "If a man does not say in his heart, 'In the world there is only myself and God,' he will not gain peace." End quote. If a man does not say in his heart, "In the world there is only myself and God," he will not gain peace. I mean, that begs the age-old question, what are you looking for? If you're looking for something to give you peace and love and faithfulness and who will be there for you throughout time, then in the world there is nothing but you and God. But if you're looking for shoes or a car to give you the same kind of faithfulness and love that God does, you're never going to find peace. Because you can hug a car, I guess, but the car is not going to hug you back. The car is not going to talk to you. That's the issue there. If you want peace, the world needs to be between you and God. Page 49, item 5, Abba Galatius, yep. Quote, "It was said of him that in his youth he had led a life of poverty as an anchorite. At that time, in the same region, there were many other men with him who had embraced the same lifestyle. Among them there was an old man of very great simplicity and poverty, living in a single cell to the end. Although in his old age he had disciples. This old man's particular acts of asceticism had been to guard against having 2 tunics until the day of his death, not to think of the morrow whilst he was with his companions." When Abba Galatius, with the divine assistance, founded his monastery, he was given many gifts, and he acquired beasts of burden and cattle, which were needed for the monastery. In the beginning, he had discussed the foundation of the monastery with the divine Pacomus, and had recourse to him throughout its foundation. The old man, of whom we have spoken above, seeing him engaged on this, and wishing to preserve the great love he had for him, said, Abba Galatius, I am afraid your spirit will become enslaved by the lands and all the other possessions of the monastery. But he replied, your spirit is more enslaved by the needle with which you work than the spirit of Galatius by these goods. End quote. Galatius sees a gentleman who's a hero. This gentleman is a hero because all he has is a desire for God and one tunic. He makes sure he never gets two tunics and he never worries about tomorrow. But then when Galatius starts his monastery, the man comes to him and says, I'm worried that you're going to become a slave to the cows and the horses and the building and the people and all of that sort of other thing. Galatius responds, you're more a slave to your piety than I will be a slave to these things. Which is an interesting comment. Anything, Martin Luther said everything in moderation, even in moderation. So to be an ascetic, to look at taking your life in the slimmest possible means is fine until a point where living that lifestyle becomes a replacement for piety itself, right? When the task is the end itself. I want to have one tunic and never think of tomorrow because that's what I'm doing. Then it becomes sinful. Then it becomes a problem. When lifestyle choices help direct our thoughts, minds, and attention to God. All right, I only have one tunic. I don't need to worry about what I'm wearing because I only have one thing. So I can pray more. I can focus on God more. I can engage with God more. That is a positive. So if Galatius has all these cows and he beasts of burden and property and land, and he does his chores, but then still chooses to make time for God, that could very well be a better situation than this old man who his task at hand is asceticism, if that asceticism is for the sake of asceticism itself and not for the sake of God Almighty. All right. We're getting there, folks. We're getting there. Page 133, Macarius the Great. Quote, one day Abba Macarius went to see Abba Anthony. A little crossover episode for us here. He spoke to him and then returned to the Cetus, the desert. The fathers came to meet him, and as they were speaking, the old man said to them, I said to Abba Anthony that we do not have an offering in our district. But the fathers began to speak of other things without asking him to tell them of the old man's reply, and he himself did not tell them. One of the fathers said about this, that when the fathers see that the brethren failed to question them about something that would be useful, they ought to begin talking about it themselves. But if they are not urged on by the brethren, they should not say any more about it, so that they shall not be found to have spoken without being asked, and to have said unnecessary words. End quote. Abba Macarius talks to Abba Anthony. They talk about not having an offering. Now he's telling the story. No one asked. He doesn't tell. As I always say to people who say, I want to reach out, but I never have gotten to it, but they've never called me, I always tell people, the telephone works two ways. There's really a responsibility in a conversation both ways. Abba Macarius probably should have said the answer to the question that he asked of Abba Anthony while he was talking to the other fathers. The other fathers should have probably also asked what the answer was. But in this reality, it's when the practice outweighs the common sense, not wanting to have said any unnecessary words. Part of that asceticism is you only do what is necessary. One tunic, simple house, you eat rice every day. You don't want to waste anything at all, including words. So, a great story underlining that the phone works two ways. There's a responsibility on both ends. Page 135, a little further down, item 29, Abba Macarius said, "Do not sleep in the cell of a brother who has a bad reputation." End quote. I grew up in the South, and my mother would always say, "Be careful of the company you keep." We are judged by the people that we hang out with. You're judged in the morning by the house that you walk out of the night before. And that's not to say judged in any kind of specifically negative Christian way, but people see the neighborhood you're coming out of and they judge you. It is what it is. And so to be aware of the company we keep, to be aware of the places where we are, to be aware of those sort of things and how they impact the way that people impact with us or interact with us. One final reading. This is from the same book, page 159, item 1 on that page. From Abba Zionitis. Quote, Abba Zionitis said, "The thief was on the cross, and he was justified by a single word. And Judas, who was counted in the number of the apostles, lost all of his labor in one single night and descended from heaven to hell. Therefore, let no one boast of his good works, for those who trust in themselves fall." End quote. Very true and very powerful. The slave crucified, or the criminal crucified to the side of Christ, one conversation. Christ tells him, "You will be remembered in heaven." Judas, in one interaction, really kind of jumps the ship on that one. Judas, I'm sure, thought he was fine, but I think that's the point. The criminal crucified next to Jesus knew he couldn't do anything himself and was trusting entirely in the reality of who and what Jesus was as the Christ. So I lied to you. I'm going to read you one more also from Zionitis, still on page 159, item 3. I'm a dog lover. I have 2 dogs. I have 3 dogs at the moment. Caroline's in town, and so I have Biscuit, who is 15 pounds. I have Winston, who is 47 pounds. And I have Zeus, who is 183 pounds. And the 3 of them are great. They all get along. It's, having extra small, medium, and extra large dogs running around the house. And so this is a writing from Zionitis. Zionitis said, quote, "A dog is better than I am, for he has love and does not judge." End quote. I wish I could get that put on a poster. I would hang it in my office. "A dog is better than I am, for he has love and does not judge." May we all be so brave as to be like dogs, to have love for one another, to have love for creation, to have love for the love and the unknown, and to not judge. Again, thank you all so much for listening. What I'll do is in the description for this article. I will put a link to the book Sayings of the Desert Fathers that I've been reading from throughout this podcast. I'll also put a link in for our Vanco giving site. Again, we really appreciate anybody who's listening at home. If you want to support the work and ministry of Faith Lutheran Church, right now, all of our live activities are postponed as we get through this coronavirus reality. However, once those live events start happening again, worship, outreach, quilters group, men's breakfast, Bible study, please join us, faithwhitehall.com. Our address is 730 Collingwood Avenue. And if you want to support the ministry, both here online and in person, check the link in the description for our Vanco giving. You can give directly to the ministries we do via the internet, or you could send a check to 730 Collingwood Avenue and just write offering or Faith Lutheran Church in the make payable to line. Thank you so much for listening. It's always a pleasure. I am Pastor Hilly, and until next time, God loves you, and so do I. God bless.